Hi, I'm Deb Langford, and I am the head of J.P. Morgan Private Bank's Black Wealth Initiatives. Welcome to J.P. Morgan's 2022 Summer Reading List series. We are thrilled today to be joined by art and photography collector Dr. Kenneth Montagu, who's joining us from his home in Toronto to talk about his art and photography collection. Dr. Montagu, welcome. I want to thank you for joining us from your home in Toronto.
Thank
So thank you so much.
You're most welcome,
And
right? Yeah, thank you.
well, I have to tell you, as as a photographer, I shared with you as we were getting to know each other that I'm just in awe of your art and photography collection. And I'm so thrilled that your book, As We Rise, Photography from the Black Atlantic, is one of our coveted books featured on the JP Morgan 2022 Summer Reading List. I was really inspired by how you started your love for photography, that your family would bring you to Detroit, and either it was a baseball game or you went to the Detroit Institute of Arts, and there you saw this photo of a Black couple in raccoon coats standing in front of their Cadillac. Can you tell us more about why that photo really stuck with you and inspired you?
It's a great place to start. Yeah, I was born in the '60s in Windsor, Ontario, which is the southernmost Canadian city, and it's right across the river from Detroit, Michigan. And so my parents are both immigrants from Jamaica, and they were early early migrants to Canada. We have a sizable Caribbean community now, but they were probably we were probably the second Jamaican family in a town of 100,000 plus people. So really feeling like an island, and I think luckily I have parents that were really into the arts, and as you mentioned, would take us to not only sporting events and to play dates with our friends, but also to art galleries and music concerts. And so one of the places that I loved as a kid was the Detroit Historical Society and also the Detroit Institute of Arts. My father was doing a graduate degree at Wayne State University in Detroit, and on a weekend he would be studying, and my mother would bring my brother, sister, and I over to the gallery, and we would just look at art. And I didn't know anything about being an art collector. We had some art in our house, but we were no way, form, or shape kind of collectors. It was just things that meant something to us. And so for me, this photograph that I came upon by the Harlem Renaissance photographer James Van Der Zee, it just really resonated with me. I had never seen depictions of African Americans in such a positive light. I was growing up with, the typical media of the time and TV shows that were always showing people being buffoons, and it just wasn't really reflecting my family. And so I saw an artwork that was very aspirational, a couple wearing raccoon coats in this beautiful Cadillac with white wall tires, and there were Harlem brownstones behind them. And for a 10-year-old kid, seeing that work and seeing people in your own community depicted that way in the context of an art gallery full of Monet and Manet, it was like, yeah, I need to spend a longer time with this than just seeing it on the walls of the gallery. So, probably 10 years later, when I was 20 and in dental school at University of Toronto, I started to, go to friends' art openings and read a lot more about art. I still couldn't afford to buy anything, but I was getting into it that early, and it became a big part of my life, really, from that lightning bolt moment with that image. So, I feel very happy that I had a childhood that was engaging that way. It really, really set me on a path.
I love that. I love that story because when you were interviewed about that picture, the other piece that came out and resonated with me was that it showed Black wealth, right? And I think you said that it began your thought that Black History Month is every month,
Yes,
right? And so is that another part of why you thought photography was really important to collect and to showcase?
absolutely. I mean, I have to say that my as a collector now, and of course after a few years of being a dentist, the urge was too strong. I couldn't deny it any longer. I started, buying artwork and wanting to spend longer time, having it being part of my life and showcase it to other people. But as the journey continued, I realized that a bigger part of my mission was really to ensure that people in my own communities, as Black people, that we would, in a sense, keep a piece for ourselves, like make sure that this artwork that depicts our community, that is often by artists within our own community, is also retained by people in the community. And I realized that collecting for me was, a deeper mission. It's about generational wealth. I have a family and a 7-year-old and a 5-year-old son, and they're growing up in a house full of art, and I hope that that will be something that they will appreciate. If not become collectors themselves, they'll appreciate how it's added value, of course monetarily, but also spiritually to our home. Artwork is about something that is enriching for the viewer, and to actually own the artwork and live with it is another level of that kind of commitment. And it's all about generational wealth for me.
Well, that certainly aligns with what we're doing, right, at the
Yeah.
firm. And as I said in my introduction, I'm the head of Black Wealth Initiatives. And that's really what we are solving for, right, is to increase generational wealth, right? And, the wealth that is so deliberately earned so that it can be as deliberately impact, right? And impacted for generations to come, right? And I think there's like no better space to talk about with regards to art. I mean, you've been collecting for 3 decades, and you started in your home, and at some point you had to move it out of your home. You were having this gallery, right? So let's talk about that. You started the wedge collection.
Yes, and that word wedge, people are always like, "Well, why don't you just use your surname, the Montague?" But for me, it's really well. The origin is that I lived in a loft way back in the '90s when I started my own dental office. I bought a industrial loft space with some other people in Toronto, kind of a co-op, and my space had a wedge-shaped hallway, maybe 4 feet going out to 15 feet, but that went along about 50 feet. So the whole first floor was this wedge. And so, right from the start, the designer, who's also a Black Canadian, a Jamaican Canadian designer, we had this synergy around this idea of living in this space that would double as an art gallery. And I started having Saturday afternoon and Sunday afternoon salons, people coming over and just talking about art, put some art on the wall, have a show. And very quickly it became a commercial art gallery, and I'm a dentist with this gallery. But I realized quickly that I didn't want to sell art. I'd rather tell stories. And so it was more of a curatorial project. And I think that, this wedge idea that became nomadic after that, we, became too big for my house. We started using other spaces, renting spaces, dealing with other organizations. And I started a nonprofit called Wedge Curatorial Projects, with a mandate to wedge these artists that I love, these contemporary African artists, into the mainstream of contemporary art. So that double entendre, that double meaning of wedge, exists to this day.
That is fantastic. So, what I especially love about your book, right, is that it's global, right? Because you've got photography from artists from Canada, Caribbean, Great Britain, United States, South America, through the African continent. So, this is really a global experience.
Yes, it
Why
is.
did you decide to call it As We Rise?
Another great question. I'm looking at the book in front of me here, so here it is. In case your viewers don't know, yeah, I'm sure they'll see it.
Right?
But "As We Rise" really refers to um, the phrase that my late father would always say, Spurgeon Montague. He died in 2018, but he had this great long life and very philosophical guy. He would always talk about this idea that as we do well, we should be lifting up others in our own community. This idea of lifting as we rise. And when I told that story to the people at the Aperture Foundation, who had invited me to put a project together, a book project for them to consider. They just love this story, this idea of "As We Rise." It's a kind of a metaphor for what I've been doing with the collection, bringing these artists, many of them emerging artists, not so well known, into the limelight and into being celebrated alongside the better known artists. So the book is a real collection of the known entities and the unknown, and it's trying to lift everyone up so that we kind of can appreciate this art on a level that it really hadn't been given before.
So in Teju Cole's introductory essay for the book, right, he discusses there's an intimacy that connects the images. What
Yes.
was your process in picking the images and about how many are in the book?
Oh, well, I think there's, over 100 images in that book, over 70 artists. But yeah, I think, Teju really did a wonderful thing in kind of writing this letter to the collector. He's a friend and he's been to my home in Toronto, and we know that he's a beautiful writer and one of the world's great writers on photography, and had written, for many years a column called On Photography for the New York Times that I loved. So it was a big thrill for me that Teju agreed to sort of write this introduction. And it's a letter. It's kind of from him to me, just his feelings about the collection. And he kind of equates it to, or what I've been doing as my collecting activities, this idea of mixing and remixing an album, sort of the way a DJ or a producer might put a record together. This idea of the photo album as kind of like a record album. It's not only greatest hits and a sort of obvious thing like that, but more this idea of placing objects together that maybe gain from being together, their meanings kind of multiply. And very early on in the process with the book, it was discovered that we could think about the Wedge collection through three lenses: the lenses of community, identity, and power. And I think that was a very important sort of development, because I collect kind of thinking about different tropes like hairstyles or music, and but to work with the very experienced people and the book editors at Aperture, it was very obvious to me that there was a kind of a bigger idea at play, this idea of community, identity, and power. And I think Teju really understood that, and thinks about it in that way of a record, like putting an album together. And you could think of it like a photo album. You open it up, you look at pictures that might be family photos against other pictures that might be pictures of protest. But the overriding feeling here of my collection that I think the book is encapsulated is uplift as we rise. It's not about pictures about oppression, and you're not going to find that work in my collection. It's about celebrating the beauty of ordinary life, the ordinary Black life, and also Black power, thinking of having agency over how you're depicted. And I think that, As We Rise is all those things and maybe more. It's a book, so you can take out of it what you will.
Right. Community, identity, and power. Right.
Yeah.
So let's dive deep into those three.
All right.
Right. Um, are there two photos in each community, identity, and power that you think are really reflective of the entire theme?
Wow, what a question! It's a great question. They're all my babies, Deborah, so it's very difficult.
Okay.
But I will say that there's an image that's actually on the cover of the book, that of a young
Okay.
man on a
Young man
bicycle. Yeah,
with a
beautiful.
flag, with a UK flag, right?
Yes, the
Yeah,
Union
that's one
Jack.
that resonated with me too.
Oh, that's great, because
Yeah.
I think it's very personal for me. I bought that image, seeing that kid and thinking of myself when I was a 10 or a 12-year-old riding around in Canada, in my little town of Windsor, where again we were like the only Black family on the block, and I would put a Canadian flag on my banana seat bike in the 1970s, and it was sort of a statement. It was saying, I'm Canadian. This is who I am. Even if everyone around you goes, "Oh, you're Jamaican," it's like, no, I was born here. This is, this land is my land too. And it's kind of like a different thing for that child in that image, because that's in Birmingham in the UK. And at that moment in the 70s, in Handsworth Park, there were protests happening. There was a moment in England, British history, where there was a lot of fascism, and the National Front was sort of, all over the news with a very kind of right wing agenda. And I think this young child is saying, kind of screw you to those people who are anti-immigration, and his parents might be Jamaican, but he's born in England. He's saying this is who I am, and that essential question of this is who I am kind of permeates through that community section. There's another photograph from that section by Jamel Shabazz, who's a well-known um, kind of documentarian of the birth of hip hop, 1980s subway in New York, seeing kids that are dressed the same, carrying a boombox, just having fun in a kind of more innocent time. And I think that those images, and I've got a lot of his work in my collection, and Jamel's become a good friend, but those images really speak to me. They're timeless. It's 1980s in New York, but it could be, 2022 in, Rio de Janeiro, or it could be, 1950s in back in Harlem. I mean, it's a kind of a continuum about how young people respond to their conditions and social conditions. And I think it becomes an important document about community and thinking about community as a kind of an interplay between the photographer and the subject. So he's a guy who will say, "Give me a little more flavor," and the person moves that way, and he's capturing their image in a kind of dance between the photographer and the subject. I think about all of that under the banner of community. It's a kind of a interaction. And then for identity, gosh, there's so many beautiful images. Identity for me is Black identity is answering that question, who am I? So there are a lot of images in that section, you'd say, by an artist like Carrie Mae Weems, who we celebrate as a great African American portraitist. But she talks a lot about her family, and I have the pleasure and the honor of having a kind of a unique image in my collection. There's only one of it in the world, and it's a self-portrait, her first self-portrait taken at age 21. And it's in a room in her apartment, and you see other photographs in the photograph, very personal. And I think that, making a statement like that as an artist, the self-portrait, for me is the epitome of that identity piece. And I'll kind of move to the final section, power. Power is, for me, about agency. It's about having control over how you want to be seen in the world. And for so many years, we look back at the history of photography, it was always, when it comes to the Black community, images of not only oppression, but images of the oppressed. And it's sort of like the image was taken, say, for a European audience, not for an audience of people, say, in the Caribbean who were working in a cane field. And, when we think about the way that we want to depict ourselves now as a community, it's very much about having control over how you want to be seen. So images by an artist like Micheline Thomas, who again does self-portraiture and will place herself in 1970s looking boudoir, and she will go into that classic pose that looks like one of those images from the Western canon of art, but she's placing herself as a Black woman and her body front and foremost, and giving it love and care in the image. And these are the kind of images that really appeal to me now as a collector. I think that power section is kind of where I'm at. So it's not just political power, it's also very personal power. So I hope that answers the question in a long way.
No, absolutely. Actually, when you were talking about the young man, I thought he was an example of all three,
It's so
right?
true.
Because it was community. He was very confident in his identity to have that flag. That was a choice, right? And then the power of saying, this is who I am, right? I'm not going to
You
shy
totally
away from
get
it,
it. You totally
right?
get it, Deborah. And that was our conundrum, where to place them,
Right.
because you can think about them through those lenses, all of the works. And I think that's a great example that you stated about how one work could be seen through the three different lenses. So thank you for that.
All of it. No, I'm so excited about the book.
Yeah.
So you are an art collector. I'm sure you're in an ecosystem of other art collectors.
Yes.
Do you talk about, what you're collecting, what you're interested in? Are they also, when they realized that you were writing a book, did they have any insights about it or any things that you considered?
That's another great question. Yeah, for so many years, I felt like an island. You can imagine I've been doing this for almost 30 years. Back in the 90s, when I started, it was always just me at an art fair or a biennial in terms of the presence of Black folks collectors, and that has really changed. And very recently, in the last decade, I see more and more people, in my own community buying art on a high level, and that's a thrill to me. I mean, I feel like a pioneer that way, and I'm proud of that. I'm always trying to lift as we rise and bring people into the fold. I feel like over time, the idea of collecting has sort of changed. I think it's becoming something that people feel that they can be part of, where it was very exclusionary before. And I feel like you can start at any level. When I started collecting, it was $100 photographs, sometimes less. $25 at a community fair or something that a friend of mine made as a student. But it goes higher in cost as things go deeper, of course, with your passion for it and your knowledge around it. But I always feel that there's room for people to consider collecting at every level. I mean, it's not just for people of means. It is something that will bring you wealth. I mean, it is, in my case, I was very early um, in the game as a collector in the particular genre, which is, contemporary African art. And so, I bought work for $500 that maybe worth, $20,000 now. I mean, it's that kind of appreciation. And I don't say that to boast. I say that to say that that's a good investment, something that I live with and I love, that brings me joy, that I can share with other people. Uh, a major book publisher approaches you because you have this object that you've loved and you lent to other galleries, and it's gained momentum. It's becoming iconic. And you feel a real part of things rather than apart from things when you're a collector. And I think that's something that our community in particular needs to discover. I feel like there's many ways that we can spend our money, but collecting art is like such a kind of a brings you so much joy personally, because it's an investment that you live with. You're not just looking at a screen and seeing something going up and down. You're not investing with a bunch of other people in something that may or may not work. The point is, even if the art appreciates very little or not at all, you're going to love it and live with it, grow with it, and it's going to be something that you're going to pass on. So I feel like in that way, collecting is really something that we should all be doing.
It's interesting because really what you're talking about is art is very unique in that you can have love for it, for an image. It can bring you joy, but
Yes.
it's also an asset,
So
right? And it's an asset that appreciates, right? I mean, that's a strategy. It's a wealth strategy. And you're right, there are a lot of people in communities that don't realize that,
yeah,
right? That this is part of a strategy, for generational wealth. So you are still a practicing dentist, is
I
that
am.
right?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So are there any of these pieces in the book in your office?
Yeah, that's another great question. Yeah, I live with the art at home. I live with it at work.
Okay.
I lend the work to major galleries as a artwork that's now at Tate Modern in London as part of a big show. But at home in Toronto, yeah, my dental patients, I think, enjoy the fact that they'll come in for their 6 month cleaning, and it might be new work that they're going to see in the waiting room. The artist Jamel Shabazz that I just talked about, with those great images of young people on the subway trains in New York in the 80s. That's what's on the wall of my waiting room right now, and people love that because it's like the kind of thing where you look at it and you go, that reminds me of my aunt, blah blah blah, and those pictures that I have at home where she's wearing bell bottoms and some satin dress, and it's very interesting what it means for people, for different people. And of course, we had an image by the very well known artist Kehinde Wiley, who did that portrait of Obama, and he's also become a good friend, and we've hung out in Toronto when he's visited here. But that artwork that I managed to buy many years ago before he was quite famous, is now really valuable. I had to take it off the wall of the dental office because, that's one of those assets that you can't really risk losing,
Right.
yeah, there were many years of, oh, I just like that. It's such a beautiful image. And now it's like, is that the work by that guy who did the portrait of Obama? And so, you kind of have to protect your assets too. So that one came home.
Right, right. You don't want anybody to touch it, right? To say, wow, I wonder how that feels, right? You don't
Exactly.
want that,
Yeah.
right? No, no, we don't want that. We want you to keep it. So,
Yeah.
one other big question, and I'm going to go into some rapid fire questions after that. Okay. The timing of this book to me is really important because certainly the pandemic impacted everyone, right, globally, right?
Yes.
And so now to have a book of photography, of images, of celebrations, and things that maybe were put on hold for 2 years. Can you talk about that? I mean, was the timing very important for you for As We Rise?
Yes. I feel like, I was anxious to get these works out and share them with the world, but I was holding on because the collection was growing. And in the last 5, 10 years, many people who've seen the work in various small exhibitions that are subsets of the collection in places like Detroit or in Raleigh, North Carolina, where we've had shows, or in Canada, have been saying to me, you really should put it together and have a book or something. And I kind of hemmed and hawed a bit because I wasn't sure if people were ready and if the collection was really ready to be shown like that. And interestingly, right at the beginning of the pandemic is when Aperture, the book publisher, approached me. And it really felt, as we sort of had our discussions early on, that the time was right, in the sense that we felt strongly that I think artwork and photography in particular had reached a stage where um, we wanted to talk about the works that had been excluded from the canon of art and art books and coffee table books for so long. So I think it was also important to Aperture that they promote and publish a book that is images of Black folks by Black folks, a contributing set of writers that are also in the Black community, and of course the collector, myself, being Black. I think all those elements were important for this idea of you know um, for us, by us, for us kind of thing. And I also think that, interestingly, over the time that we were working on the book, of course, um, the whole George Floyd murder happened, and of course, people became very sensitized globally to the plight of people who have been oppressed, and then the book took on a kind of a different light, of course, through that time, and it became important for us to see images of celebration, of self-care, of love, in light of all these images that were bombarding us of pain and suffering. So the book actually became a solve for people, a balm. It was really I get a little teary when I think about that, because the book really resonates with people in this moment for different reasons maybe than when we started. So yeah, thank you for asking that.
The other thing as you were speaking that I thought about, yes, for us, by us, but appreciated by all,
So
right? So this is a book that clearly, all audiences
yeah,
can enjoy and respect. So that is absolutely amazing. And I was going to save this line to the end, but clearly, when you say a picture is worth 1,000 words, right? That's what you're talking about, right?
yeah,
Because the person can look at it and can have the context of, when did this happen? Where did it happen? But what was going on and what that person was feeling is something that people can really ponder about. So, all right, I've got some rapid fire questions for you.
I'm
Ready?
ready. I'm ready.
Okay. All right. What is on your summer read list? Since we're talking about your book is on our JP Morgan 2022 summer reading list series.
There is a book that is becoming a bestseller in Canada, from a Toronto writer who happens to be Jamaican Canadian like myself. The book is called Frying Plantain. That's in frying the fruit plantain. And Frying Plantain is by Zeleka Reed, just Zeleka Benta Reed. And she is one of our rising writers. And the book really, I think, will resonate for anyone because it's a coming of age story, but it's also, thinking about one's own identity and the pleasures and the burdens of having a kind of a dual identity, having, parents who are from one place and you're kind of growing up in another place, and all the joys and sorrows that come with the misunderstandings and the sweet appreciations that go with that kind of sameness and difference. It's a great book. So that's Frying Plantain. I'm in it right now, and I don't want to put it down. It's a good one.
All right. Here are two quick questions. Candid or posed photos? Which one do you prefer?
I have a love for both, and I know that's a weak answer, so I'm going to say that I prefer posed when it comes to thinking about, how one might want to present themselves in terms of their Sunday best. And I think that there's a lot of work in my collection that reflects that. Works from, say, West Africa from the 1950s, where there were independence movements happening and people were coming into their own, and many of these nations were becoming kind of, throwing off their colonial kind of powers. And, you want to wear your Sunday best and be seen as, important. And this is who I am. And I think that, those portraits, they have a meaning, and there's a reason that one would want to pose rather than be caught off guard. Those are very deliberate images. On the other hand, there are images in As We Rise, for instance, like a very casual image by the young and emerging photographer Kennedy Carter, and she's getting her hair cut with a razor, electric shaver by her father. And I think that's the only image in the book that kind of was taken during the whole pandemic. And it's a very personal, very intimate image. It's not really posed though. It's just someone just took a shot of this. It's very casual. And I think that reflects and tells a story about father and daughter, maybe more than a set posed sort of kind of image like that. I think that there's room for both the posed and the candid in terms of appreciating the beauty of photography.
I so agree with what you're saying, and I can't wait to go through the book to see the differences because I think you're right that when you're posed, you're stopping time, you're deliberate. I want you to see me and my group or just me, right? And yet a candid is you caught a moment,
So true.
right? One produces a moment, and the other one is I caught a moment,
It's
right? And both can bring joy, and both are interesting. Last question:
okay.
black or white or color?
Another hard one. I would say this really shows my age. I'm in my 50s now. I like black and white. I think black and white take out a lot of unnecessary clutter, and sometimes we get thrown or seduced by color, but you can really appreciate detail and the message of particularly portraits when they're in black and white. That said, some of my
Okay.
favorite work in my collection is vividly color. And so, there's an appreciation I have of both. But I would say, uh, again, going back to that first image that spoke to me, um, from the Detroit Institute of Arts, from James Van Der Zee, that was an image of the Harlem Renaissance. That was, an analog camera, black and white picture, silver gelatin print. I think these things maybe are even more special to me in this age when everyone has a camera on their phone and color photography is sort of ubiquitous. So I'm with the black and white for those reasons.
Once again, we agree, right?
Oh, that's good.
There's a richness. There's a richness to it, right? So, Dr. Montague, I can't thank you again for
Thank
joining us from your home in Toronto, taking this generous amount of time to describe your book, As We Rise Photography from the Black Atlantic. I am super excited that it is one of the selections of our J.P. Morgan 2022 summer reading list. And for everyone who has joined us watching this, thank you. Thank you for joining us for the J.P. Morgan 2022 reading list series. We hope you will join us again for another exciting interview on one of our upcoming books. And I will see you in the bookstore buying As We Rise and going through the photos and enjoying them. So thank you, everyone.